Yes, Shruti.
Yes. So I think we can start. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Vinos Venture Engine. So I'm Sri Shruti, and I head marketing and partnerships at Vinos. To give you a brief idea about what we do, Vinos is a comprehensive platform of startup resources for entrepreneurs with a suite of products and programs for early stage entrepreneurs, innovators, research centers, and investors. The webinar today is a part of the webinar series of our Clarity product. If you would like to be notified about our upcoming events, please go to the events panel in our website and sign up for the same. So a quick reminder to please keep yourself muted so that there is no disturbance and everyone can hear the speaker clearly. Right now I have everybody on mute to avoid background noises. Throughout the presentation, I will manage the chat functionality. And at any point during the webinar, if you have any questions, please make use of it. And we will circle back to these at the end of the webinar and address your doubts in an orderly fashion. So now that we're all set, let's begin. The question that we will be addressing today is what must be done for a good product to become a great business? So we are now in a golden age for innovation with companies revamping the business of invention and democratizing the way we monetize new ideas. So coming up with a new product or service is a lot of work, which does not stop once it's ready. Turning into a business is the other half of the equation. With so many businesses pivoting their products and services due to COVID and unable to afford opportunity losses, we thought it would be fitting for Mr. Dinesh to give you some guidance around this topic. So some of the topics that would be touched upon today are why a good product or service does not sell itself, going beyond product value to value proposition, product pricing and business models, how to identify roadblocks, and the concerns and alignment of stakeholders necessary to build a business. Without any further ado, I request Professor Thilairajan to kick off the session for today.
Okay, thank you, Sri Shruti. And on behalf of all the participants and on behalf of Vinos, let me welcome Dinesh to this webinar. And I'm glad that Dinesh could find the time to share his thoughts with us. And Dinesh has been a good friend for many years now. And I think if there is one person who had such a very enviable experience in the venture capital and private equity segment, I think that would be Dinesh. He's actually worked been a part of, started several top private equity funds in the country today. And I'm so delighted to welcome Dinesh part of it. So one of the things I've had a chance to listen to Dinesh earlier when he also lectured at IIT Madras in one of my classes, and he has a very good a knack of telling a most complicated of things in a very simple fashion, and in a way that people can actually relate to the ground reality. And I'm sure we will, during this session today, we will have many more such examples that he can share with us. And so thanks and welcome everybody. And over to you, Dinesh.
Thanks, Professor Tele, for your kind words, and I do hope to live up to your expectations there. And thanks, Sri Shruti, for giving a very crisp introduction. Let me just share my screen here and just. Is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect, which is there. So I just thought the topic today is actually very relevant. And the reason why it's relevant is also because of the fact that one, starting a new business, starting entrepreneurship are essentially one, what is the need of the day to day? And having been an entrepreneur myself and actually worked in the venture capital space for a number of years, and I can tell you that there's nothing more satisfying than actually one going through the journey of entrepreneurship. Financial rewards apart, I think the entire journey is a reward in itself there. Having said that, I think very clearly the very often this journey is basically fraught with challenges here. You do come across statistics that a large number of new products actually fail, right? A product may be good. So even if you take an example of an FMCG company like a Hindustan Lever, Unilever, or a Procter & Gamble or anybody, right? When you launch a product, you find that close to almost about 65-70% of the times, it doesn't really succeed. And if you start taking up this on early stage businesses, the numbers actually stack up against you. Now, this is clearly not an acceptable proposition, right? And I think what one needs to do is to sort of increase the probabilities and to sort of find out what are the challenges that are there in building a business and to try and ascertain some of them, right? The idea is to sort of look at basically what are the, not to provide answers, but pretty much to look at this in a holistic fashion, right? And to consider why do businesses fail and why do they fail at the intrinsic level, which is in. And then to try and take some lessons from why they fail into what can be done to actually make products better businesses here. So when you start to sort of take that, I mean, why do businesses fundamentally fail, right? I mean, they basically fail because you're not able to sell the product and there's no customer for that particular product, which is in. Why is that the case? That is because the customer doesn't see value in what you're trying to build or provide, which is there. Now, I mean, this is at the very core of whatever is there. This is essentially what is the fundamental problem that is in place. I thought it's best to sort of start to describe this with basically a few examples that we would all be familiar with. And I sort of chose this example of Harley Davidson because I'm sure a number of you would have seen in the news about a couple of fortnights back that Harley Davidson is shutting down its Indian operations and closing that down, right? I don't think there's anybody here who can basically argue or even think that Harley Davidson is not a good product. It's an amazingly good product, withstood the test of time for over a century, which is in place. But ironically, it is very difficult for them to have actually made this business successful. And I think we'll talk more about it in terms of the fact that what's a good product and what's a good business. The reason I'm trying to put some of these examples in front is to basically show that great products need not be entirely great businesses here. Yeah. Similarly, let's take another example that we are all familiar with, which is basically the Tata Nano. I mean, Tata Motors is basically the preeminent business in the country there, right? And when they envisaged the Tata Nano, this is almost about 10-15 years back, primarily it was basically a great concept. It caught the imagination of the world. It was pretty much a case study in terms of what was being done there. And very clearly, I think it put from a concept, from a thought, from an idea, it was absolutely perfect, which is in. It was basically making giving the person who drove a motorcycle an ability to afford a car. And when you start to look at it, the product, and when you start to look at the product and by means of its idea and the thought was actually perfect. But when you start to put it together as a business, was it really successful? The answer is really no. Despite the capital that went in, despite the trustworthy brand name of the Tatas that it had, and the amount of massive engineering skill sets that went into it, it still wasn't successful, right? And if you start to take that, I think one can actually argue as to and say why did it fail. But I think rather than getting into the reasons as to why it failed, what I want to sort of highlight is that it was a good product, had the best probability of success. You had almost about 8,000 crores odd spent into it. It came from the most preeminent business houses in the country, which evokes trust that was there, and people were willing to sort of give it an opportunity to test it out. But just because of the fact that, and in hindsight, it is very easy to say and look at everything in hindsight and say that one, of course, it did not work. Nobody really wanted a cheap car. The price tag that was put, which was about ₹1,00,000 at that point in time, or $2,500 at the point in time when it was introduced, was basically the wrong price point. Because the price point was low, you basically had to sort of fit pricing and parts within that. and you're not able to meet quality in place and make sufficient investments that were there. So you look at it, it's a great example of a product or a business which is good, but not a great business. Another example that one can take, and I'm sure some of you may be familiar with it, was basically much before the retail chains became popular in the country. You had Mr. R. Subramaniam, who started Subiksha. And Subiksha, for those of you who remember, at the point in time when it was introduced, was a fairly innovative concept which was there. The whole concept of basically buying in bulk, basically passing on those discounts to individual customers in terms of medicines, making a way to generic medicines that was in place. So it's basically a great concept. But if you look at it, at the point in time, it started out, was pretty good. But the fact is, were you able to convert it into a business model that would be viable, would actually generate enough sufficient margins to keep it alive? I think those were really the challenges. And essentially, it is like everything else. It is a negative spiral. Once you get into a negative spiral, very difficult to come out of it. In terms of the fact that if your pricing is low, your margins are low. If your margins are low, your ability to reinvest is low. Your customer service becomes low, and hence it just gets into a negative spiral, which is in. From being basically the leading light to essentially a sharp fall of the entire business and running out of cash was basically pretty much that happened. I mean, and just because of the fact that it was a good idea, a good thought, but not a viable business model, which is in. And I think the list of examples is numerous. And I think when you start to look at it within your own world and domain, I'm sure you'll come across a number of such products and businesses that you can relate with, where it's good, but it's not something that has actually caught the imagination of customers. It's not been a success, and to that extent, not a great business model. We all know about Kingfisher and Kingfisher Airlines, and I'm sure all of us might have been customers at one point in time. I definitely know definitely that I lost a number of mileage, air mile points when it actually closed down. And I thoroughly enjoyed the service of Kingfisher Airlines. But it was good for the customer, but was it good as a business? I think the answer is no there. And I think having put together, you find that there are a number of examples. And I think this is just the beginning. I'm sure when you start to look at it globally across, you'll find a number of examples that really come to mind. And the idea is that if this is the case, I mean, what can be done while one is trying to put a business together that we avoid these kind of pitfalls here. So with that as an introduction, I just thought, let me just sort of get into a bit in terms of the main topic. I mean, a good product is basically a hygiene factor. You really need it in order to basically start or to basically start to build a business. But is it going to be enough? Definitely not. And as Shishruti mentioned, it is part of it's the beginning, but definitely not nowhere to the end of the whole process. So in my in my talk, what I want to do is to address some of the pitfalls that are there in terms of essentially what businesses do, and more from the perspective of startups and early stage businesses. And I'll sort of try and confine it within those constraints and parameters. If you have any questions, I would definitely encourage you to add them in the chat box. I'm happy to address them as and when they pop up, or pretty much towards the end of the session that would be there. But please feel free to put out any thoughts, comments, questions that you would really have on this. Yeah, I think when we start, what's a good product and what's a good business? And I was just thinking of basically how do I put it into a very simple manner? What's the difference between the two? Very often the difference in people's minds get blurred. So I thought I'll put down a very simple thought. A product is something that you solve somebody's problem, right? It could be, and I'm using the word product here as synonymous with a service that could be there. A product or the service actually helps do something much easier. It addresses the problem. It essentially meets the requirements that a person really has. So if that is a product, what is a good business? A business is a product that works so well that people are willing to pay for it. Number one, they're willing to pay for it, which is much higher than the cost it takes to actually produce and deliver that service to the customer. And if you can do that viably over a period of time in a manner that can actually scale over a period of time, that then makes it a big business, a good business there. And how do you actually, one, do all of that, which is basically produce a product that you can sell at a price point which is lower than the selling price. You're able to produce it at a much cheaper price, which is in keep the entire ecosystem happy, be able to deliver the product actually to customers, and also make a profit at the end of it. I mean, if you're able to do that, that then basically becomes a relatively good business. And I thought there's nothing better to demonstrate the difference between a product and a business than a company that we are all familiar with, right? Which is a company called Google. And I think if you look at it, Google in 1999, the founders decided to sell Google to Excite. And I don't even know how many of you remember Excite, which was basically a leading firm at a point in time. And everybody, it was basically the organization to be in. And they tried to sell it for $1 million, which is in. They got negotiated down to $750,000, but still they were not able to sell. I think the difference that I want to bring out here is that as a product, the algorithm of Google was actually worth $1 million, which is in. When you start to look at it now, I don't know how much it would really be worth. But Google as a business today, the market cap is almost $1 trillion. And that's the difference between a good product and a good business. The product, the algorithm pretty much has evolved over time, but the fundamental kernel has remained the same, which is there. And that's the big journey from $1 million to $1 trillion is essentially the journey of a product to a business. Yeah. I think very simply, when you start to put what's a good business, it must solve a problem. It must solve it better than what they can do it themselves at a price point that is lower than what the opportunity cost would be. Every business has competitors in terms of what is a way to actually address the problem. So it must be done as good as what competition does and at a price point which is definitely equal or lower to the competitors. Must operate within the laws of the land, must be a great place for employees to actually perform the service, because if you really want this whole thing to scale, you cannot do it on the back of unhappy employees, which is in place. And the scalability must actually be strong enough, and the return that it generates must be strong enough to actually attract investors, because for every business to grow, there is a need for capital to really come in, which is there. And I think if you're able to do all of this and still generate a profit, I think then you know that you've actually started a decent and a good business here. Very quickly, the elements of a good business model, and I think everybody talks about it, which is in. But the fact is that trying to put all of it together in a crunched time frame, all of us, we only have about 2,000 hours a year to actually work. That 2,000 could stretch to maybe 2,500 hours a year, but nothing more than that in terms to actually prioritize and put effort in. But I think thinking about all aspects of a business is actually critical rather than actually being blindsided. So when somebody says a 360-degree view, what he really means is looking at a problem from all angles rather than basically looking at it from a biased perspective. And we are all human beings. So to that extent, we all have our own biases in place. and trying to sort of look at something holistically, trying to address it actually makes a lot of sense. It's not having the business model alone that is important, but actually executing it well, right? I mean, all of us have seen and I thought of an example of cooking, right? Um, each one of us likes our mother's cooking, our family's cooking, right? Because the ingredients are all exactly the same. The salt, the spices, the flour, everything is the same. But the method in which it is mixed, the timing, the methodology that it is taken actually creates its own unique flavor and taste. And I think building a business in some ways, execution is in some ways something like that. It is basically being able to orchestrate all of the various elements in a relatively simple format to make sure that it really works there. So if that is the case, what are the common challenges that one comes across pretty much in that journey from basically a good product to a good business here, right? I think the first key challenge is, and most of the time, is one, is there a customer need? Very often we think within our head that there is a customer need. I mean, we will make a mousetrap and essentially a better mousetrap and customers will come. Very often you find that the market is littered with products that the customer doesn't really need. And I'll try and ask and to sort of build out as to what is that need. A customer has a need, which is then if you give somebody anything free of cost, I think pretty much you don't really need anything. So even if it is marginally attractive, it will get taken up by the consumer if you're not going to charge for it. But the minute you think about charging, which is basically charging money for the goods or service, then very clearly you need to benchmark it very clearly. And I thought I sort of came across a good model, which I thought I could sort of share with you in terms of one, a metrics to look at it, whether is it a feasible business, right? One, first of all, does somebody want this product or service, right? If you were to sell that product or service to that person, will he give you more money than what it costs you to make it, which is in, so is it a viable business which is there at all? And first of all, is it feasible itself? Can you really do it? And is your margin good enough to basically meet all the elements of costs that are there, right? As we go forward, I'll talk about a number of costs that we actually tend to underestimate in terms of the costs that are there required to get a product to market. It's not only just getting a good product in place, but also to be able to deliver it and get it in front of the customer at the price point which is in place. One, everybody talks about doing a market research thought process to sort of figure out whether it is feasible, not feasible, which is there. But one benchmark that I have is that if you could actually spend up to almost about 5% of your entire cost of project in actually one researching and basically thinking through, testing out this whole business idea to make sure that whether it is feasible at the drawing board stage, because every step that you take from now on essentially is difficult to undo at a later point in time. I think the next big challenge that we have is this a big market, right? And I think one way to think about a market is basically, one, is the market big or small? Is the need a frequent need or a recurring need? So for example, newspaper or milk is a daily item, which is why we call it a milk run as that entire concept, right? It's a frequent need. So even if my margins are relatively small, and if the ticket sizes are small, but over a period of time and the frequency that it has, it actually becomes a big business opportunity. So I think you start to think of a problem and you come across a number of problems that actually fall into, unfortunately, one of the bucket, which is that it is a relatively small issue and infrequent, which is in, and doesn't really make sense to address some of these markets there, right? You think that you may get a few people who will come to it. There will always be early adapters that will actually be interested in some products or businesses that you really provide. But is it going to be enough to allow you to scale? I don't think the answer is there. It's not going to be a great business. And as you start talking to investors, you'll find that that's not something that they find interesting at all. I think the second, the next bit that we actually underestimate is this cost of execution. And very often I've basically figured out that people underestimate the cost of actually selling to a customer, which is in, right? And it normally in most businesses, you find that the sales and marketing costs are almost equal to product development costs, which are there. Even if you start to look at, for example, say large IT companies, product companies, and you start to break down their P&L, and you find that their SG&A costs or selling costs are actually almost equal to their product development costs that are there. And the reason for that is it may be good to actually make a good product, which is in, but to actually get it in front of the customer and to actually convince them about it is basically entirely different aspect altogether there. And I think that concept of how much is it going to cost me to basically sell, making a sale of $1,000 and making a sale of $100,000 is an entirely different exercise in the way that one would really think about it. And I think that entire thought process into actually one figuring out what is going to be my pricing strategy becomes very, very important here. And in more often than not, pricing essentially is something that people are not really focused on there. It starts off pretty much as basically throwing darts on a board to just taking random guess estimates as to what a customer will pay, or basically get into a model of basically what is my cost and how much can I really charge. I think pricing and costing becomes a very, very critical exercise, and basically maintaining that the granularity that is required of pricing becomes very important. One example that I thought of demonstrating this, and I thought that most of you maybe from the technology space and essentially start to look at it, is an interesting slide that I came across on a software pricing kind of a discussion that was in place. That you find a number of people spend a number of effort, which is in the amount of effort that they put in to actually make a software product or an upgrade of a product is fairly high. But the amount of time that they're actually thinking about what they will charge for it and how will they price it and how will they actually communicate that message across is very small. And I think I just tried to put together just that the metric and the chart to show where how a thought process of pricing could actually significantly impact your business, but very few people actually end up doing that there. I think the other bit is essentially is quality, right? I mean, we always think that it is providing the best quality to the customer is great, right? I mean, but having said that, if the customer is going to pay for it, it is fine. But if the customer is not going to pay for it, right, then it doesn't make sense to actually provide that quality which is in place, right? And I came across this basically in the logistics business, that you go to any customer, he basically wants a great warehouse, which is basically full of tiles and air conditioning and all of that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, how much is he willing to pay? If he's not willing to pay for it, then it just doesn't make sense to basically provide this as a frill, which is there. It's a good way to get a customer in, but can you retain the customer for long? Can you basically invest in sales, support, technology, whatever is needed to provide that service? Definitely not. And if a business is not going to be able to generate enough pricing power, which is there, then that quality is basically pretty much a waste of time. I think the other question that a lot of entrepreneurs come with is basically is passion, right? And I think passion is good. I clearly think it is great to be passionate, which is there. But I think when it comes to running your business, I think you should think like an investor rather than a passionate person, which is in. The idea is to sort of maintain that balance between passion and objectivity, which is in place, right? And I think it's good to sort of course correct, pretty much not be wedded with your idea, but basically take the feedback from customers. Very often then you do realize that the customer is actually trying to tell you something, but just the fact that your passion leads to you're blinding your eyes and closing your ears, and you're not able to listen to what your customers or the ecosystem is really telling you here. I think the other challenge that we have is basically focusing on perfection there. And I think the thought I thought was basically more from a technology perspective that I would sort of bring this point out, is that one, rather than basically waiting for perfection, it is actually good to iterate, which is in place, and to sort of one, learn from customers' feedback there. And I think the quickest, best way of actually one, building a great product which is in, and also a great business, because you not only need to find out what the product needs to be perfect at, but the question is that at what price point will it actually sell. When you start to do a lot of these are just thoughts and ideas and hypotheses, right? It's only when the rubber hits the road, when you actually go to a customer, do you find out whether it's actually going to work or not going to work. So making the course corrections, making small products, which is in testing it out in front of customers, iterating it, and getting back to the drawing board actually makes a lot of sense. That is there. I think the other bit which is in is that, and I've seen this in most businesses, is that we all tend to get calcified, right? And as we age, we all tend to get to be a lot more rigid in our thoughts. The more successful we are, the problem is even bigger, which is in, because we tend to have a know-it-all kind of an attitude which is in place there. I think what we need to sort of keep in mind is that the market is not a static is not a static place. It's a dynamic environment. Conditions are changing, people are changing, environment is changing, competition is doing things which is in, and there's a whole ecosystem which is really at work. So what worked and the method of basically delivering value to a customer, and what worked maybe say a year back, may not really be relevant today. So I think it's very important to actually one, constantly course correct, resist the temptation of basically being calcified in your own thought process, and actually one, being a bit more paranoid about what, and the fact that because in every business, competition is actually nibbling away in the door. The only way that a business grows is by either taking the growth in the market or by taking market share away. So constantly there is somebody who's trying to take your customer away, right? And which basically means that you really need to constantly keep innovating or elevating. Otherwise, you'll find that if you don't innovate, your competitor is going to actually take your customer away. And I think clearly it's not possible to scale any business without a sound process, right? And I think very often entrepreneurialism is taken to mean lack of processes. I don't think entrepreneurialism is actually one lack of processes, but it is actually, to scale any business, you do really need systems and processes. The downside of systems and processes is bureaucracy. The question is, how do you really sort of accomplish that without actually one building these systems and processes in place there. It's like basically riding a chariot and finding that horses are pulling across in multiple different directions. As human beings, the only way we can communicate to each other is by the written word in some shape and form. By having proper job descriptions, by having proper KRAs, by having proper metrics. And I think that is something that we really need in order to be able to sort of build and scale a business there. And I think there is nothing, all things are useless unless they're implemented, right? And I think it must get done and implemented. And that is essentially where the theory and the practice comes into play. One can tell you enough about how to get a pricing discussion or a pricing negotiation with a customer done, but nothing beats the slight nuances that are in place. Over the last 25 years that I've been an investor in different businesses, you always think that I would have sat in over almost about 20, 25 odd boards. I've basically invested in over about 2 24 odd businesses, mid-sized businesses there with an average ticket of about $25 million there. And you think that you know everything, because ultimately at the end of the day, every transaction is relatively at the concept level very similar, right? Every share purchase agreement or every shareholders agreement is broadly the same. But every time that you get into a discussion, you find that there's something new. The ability to keep that, to basically be able to recognize those challenges and to get things done. Getting things done means a bit of process, a bit of gut feel, and a bit of leap of faith. I mean, it's a combination of everything in place there. I think very quickly, I think we just want to sort of leave some time for question and answers, but I'll just put together some thoughts and guidelines as to what entrepreneurs should do. All right. I think one, very clearly, one, make a honest assessment. I think one can basically talk about whatever one believes to a third party, but at the end of the day, it is very important for you and your team to actually have an honest assessment of your capabilities and a honest assessment of what the market demand is, right? And it's very easy to actually start to get concepts because the market is always trying to tell you something. The question is, you need to listen to it. Very often we realize and we think that we have great strength because our product has got X number of features, right? And we think that the competition has been stupid by not actually having those features in place. And you realize that actually the competition was smart because they realized that adding all those features makes the business complex, makes it expensive, makes it unwieldy. And adding all of that may get you maybe an incremental 5% of customers, but it sort of makes the rest of the business a lot more unstable, right? So I think truly recognizing strengths, opportunities, assessing competition, assessing threats is actually very, very critical. And I would sort of look at that. Most often than not, most businesses don't do a strong competitive analysis which is in place. Every business, every customer need is being met in some shape or the other. By introducing a new product or a service, you're basically just sort of competing for that from some other existing product or service that is already in place. Trying to understand that and to understand the customer requirements from his or her perspective is essentially very, very critical. So I'd actually urge people to actually spend a lot more time with competition, with basically the customers to actually understand this. And the good thing is most people are actually willing to speak their minds out. Very happy to do that there, if only you are willing to listen. And as I say listen, it means with the right attitude to actually one take people's opinions. I think the second thing is that you should constantly keep thinking about your business model. There, the cost structures keep changing, the channel keeps changing, the value proposition, is it enough? Are people actually addressing the other competitors coming in? Is your value proposition strong enough? Has the marketplace changed? And I think this is something that you should constantly keep thinking about, which is there, because one might think that it is static. One might think that a business plan and a business model is a once a year exercise at the time that you raise capital. I think clearly it is a constant exercise that you need to do in order to keep ahead of competition there. I think the other thing to do is to constantly keep tracking performance, right? There is a saying that says that what cannot be measured cannot be improved. So very clearly, I think improving tracking performance becomes most critical, and to be tracking performance in a timely fashion. So if you're doing a monthly review, there is a difference in doing the review in the first week of the next month and the last week of the next month, right? Because if you make that course correction in time, actually that results in value. Making the course correction 10 days late, right, has another implication. So for example, like everything else, right, when we say that taking a timely decision, when if you want to hire a person or to fire a person or to basically make an investment in a product or a service or a vendor, doing it in time makes a huge difference there. I think clearly learn to adapt and evolve, which is in. I think roles change. We all need to think of as a business evolves, as a business grows, continue to adapt. And I think most importantly, I think work with good people. Very often they're not, we tend to sort of have comfort in people who know less than us. I think very clearly surrounding yourself with good people and actually listening to them is very important. And I think you will find, and all of us at some point of time have been employees there, right? And you find that clearly and you find that frustration of your voice not being heard. And I think the question there is again that one, if you can actually listen to people, retain people is important. It's much cheaper to retain people than to actually make fresh hires. Some takeaways that I thought very quickly, which is here. One, we all think that funding is the problem in most startups, right? And I think contrary to belief, right? I think funding is really not the answer to most of the problems, right? Most businesses actually don't die because of lack of funding. Most businesses actually die because of indigestion. Most businesses die due to excess capital rather than starvation. And I think that's a statistic that you'll really come across the fact that more people, money doesn't really solve most of the issues in business today. I think the second thought that I want to leave you with is basically it is critical to take timely decisions, right? And I think a very simple example of that is that when you book a flight ticket, if you book a month in advance, it actually has an X price. And if you book it closer to the date of departure, it has an X price, right? The saying a stitch in time saves 9 is actually true. There you find that if you nip a problem in the bud, it actually creates much less complication, be it a HR problem, a customer misunderstanding, or a software product feature that is being developed, which is in. Taking a timely decision in advance actually saves a lot of money, which is in place, right? This is like playing a game of chess. Every time that you make a move, you basically give up the option of basically making certain other moves, which is in, and you're restricted to what you can do. So thinking 3 to 4 moves ahead, spending more time actually thinking, planning, sharpening your knife rather than just getting into action is actually advisable, which is there. I think the other thought that I want to leave with you is simplicity, right? And I think we tend to sort of overcomplicate our life. We tend to overcomplicate our product and the solution, which is in. We basically feel that it should have all the features. It should be like a superhuman. It should address everything. And I think a few thoughts that I came in. I mean, while an iPod is basically an example from the West, Closer Home is an example of Saregama, which is basically the music box that was in place. And you find that the main feature of that was basically it is simplicity. I mean, you really didn't have it wasn't complex, easy to operate. You didn't need a PhD to actually operate it, which is in, and which is what made it powerful. For most of our solutions, when you go to a customer, to be able to convey that value proposition in this clutter of different messages that people are getting, and to be able to sort of stand out in the customer's mind, right? Simplicity is a really powerful team. So if you are developing a product or if you are developing a process, removing something is actually more important than what you actually put into it, right? The other thought is actually also that learning how to say no, and actually saying no at times is good. You do find that customers, for example, right, it may be good to tell a customer that you cannot address his need, right? Because if addressing his need is not, if that particular need is distracting you away from your core business model, right, you are better off actually not going down that path there. So rather than basically one making a short-term play, actually one standing up and basically saying what you can do and what you cannot do early on in the conversation with clarity is a much better process there. I think this is just the last slide. I think the advise you to sort of be your own critic, pretty much. One, I think constantly keep questioning yourself, which is then, and I think to that extent, being on your toes and being paranoid, be your own critic, because if you are not your own critic, somebody else will be a critic. And I think with that, I thought, let me just open it up for any questions that are in place. And happy to address any questions that could be there. Yeah. Any Shrishruti, happy to address any questions that would be there. If there is anything that, any questions that are there, one can sort of take that in. If anybody wants to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand.
One question I have. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Devanshu here.
Yes, Devanshu.
So one of the challenges that we often see is when we are thinking from a product lens, we realize that the same technology can be applied to some other business as well, right? And then we start thinking about allied industries.
Yes.
And so the thing that happens is that we start diverting our focus to that industry, thinking that we can do that incremental thing and get some revenues. But we really do not have much idea about what the business really needs or what are the customers actually looking for. And after some time, we realize that, this wasn't really an incremental development, but the needs that they have are actually very different. And we have already spent some time and energy onto this. And
absolutely.
And there is definitely a market potential there also, but you realize that is not really the core direction of the organization that you wanted to take. In that situation, what would you recommend the way forward?
Absolutely. I mean, Devanshu, you're so right about this, right? And this is the constant problem that we have, right? And I think the challenge is because that we often think when you look at something from far, right, the grass is always greener on the other side, while you think that you're addressing a problem. So let me give you an example of this. And I sort of we were trying to develop this, working with this company that basically develops taking information, basically data from machine sensors. It's an IT/OT company, which is takes data from machine sensors and integrates it with IT infrastructure, which is in, and basically sort of provides that data in a timely fashion as an artificial intelligence there, right? So you could actually use that application across the board, right? So every business manufacturing company has sensors that throws up data, and pretty much you could actually convert that into an SAP, take that data to an SAP kind of a platform or any other dashboard, and basically make decisions. But you realize that every business, right? And one of the things I mentioned was that almost your sales and marketing efforts are almost equal to your product development efforts in reality. So if it costs you X to develop a product, it actually costs you X to actually get it to the customer there. And you find that if you're going to be focusing on the downstream oil and gas industry, right? By the time you actually get to understand that language, the nuances of that customer requirement that are there, it takes you time. So it is better to actually go narrow and a bit deep rather than to actually go wide, which is there. Because the wider that you go, you're not able to translate the value proposition in the customer's language, right? And in order to translate it into the customer's language, you need to know his business in some shape and form there. So which is why I think when you start to think about shifting over to a new customer set, a new industry or a new sector to actually sell that product or service in, just think about how much sales and marketing efforts does it really take. Then I think once you start pricing that correctly, that's when you'll be able to make a right decision.
Got it. That was a very good answer. Thank you so much. I think I love the part where you said that the cost in product development is almost similar to the cost that you will incur in sales and marketing. We don't realize that in the beginning, and you have learn that later. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I think just to sort of put one thing is, if you were to take, right, a good sales guy in the US, right, is not going to cost you less than $100,000, right? If I'm just looking at an example of the US sales guy, which is in, and if you were to take his overall cost to company, it will be $150,000, right? Including his travel costs and all of that, which is in. If you've got 2,000 hours in a year, right, the guy is costing you $75 an hour. So if he's going to spend 10 hours doing something, right, you know that that cost is $750. If it's not going to recover that money, right, in terms of that, it's not worth doing. So I think the minute you start pricing the sales and marketing costs, then it actually throws up that discipline.
Nice. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's a very good perspective to calculate the things.
Yeah.
Sure.
Dinesh, we have a few questions here in the chat panel.
Sure.
So Dairishil has asked, what according to you does an angel investor look for while investing in an early stage startup?
Absolutely. I think a great question there, right? I think I think when you start to look at it, the most important thing, right, I think is the fact that, and somebody put it well, that and I'm just answering this question from the perspective of an angel investor, right? When you look at it, the probabilities of success can be divided into 60, 30, and 10, right? 60% is basically hitting upon the right market, which is in place, right? 30% is the right business, and 10% is the effort that actually goes in, right? And the right business or the right platform. So, I mean, the right market, addressable market, the right platform, the right company, and the right effort that is in place. When you start to look at it, I think in an early stage business, all these elements are really not going to be, are not going to be what you say fully developed as such, which will be there, right? I think the question is, can you recognize an entrepreneur who is actually willing to change and open to ideas and open to thoughts which are there, is essentially what one can actually make and guess estimate. So it's more a qualitative feel of the person's overall perspective of a business rather than being fixated on a product which is in place or being passionate completely, which is there. So I think making that judgment as to whether the entrepreneur is willing to think about all of these issues and is there some demonstration of that fact, may not be directly, but there could be other related interactions that are there, right? I mean, it is very easy to get the perspective of a person in terms of the way that people interact with each other, the way that they actually think about competition, which is in the way that they actually think about execution. I think these can actually throw up some thoughts. So I think if you can identify whether the entrepreneur has this thought process and can actually develop on it, I think that's a good way of identifying the good business. And of course, I think clearly the market is essentially an assessment that one really has to make in mind as to what is good. So for example, education, EdTech is a classical example that one can give, right? I mean, I've been associated with an EdTech business now since 2017, right? Which has been there. And for 2017, 18, 19, I mean, nobody wanted to touch education much with a barge pole. Till you had Byju's that came along, and then you had the COVID crisis that took place, and that changed everything. So I think there is a time and a place for all businesses that is there, and I think sometimes you just hit upon lucky where there's an acceleration of certain trends. So for example, demonetization did that for the payment gateway process that is in place there. But getting into a market from us is in some ways timing and luck, which is there, but also a matter of assessment.
Thank you. We have another question from Srinivasan. So he's asked, as an individual, how can I assess a small business where there is a lack of proper financial documents?
I think I think when you're assessing a small business, right, I would basically suggest that it is best to talk to people there. I would definitely suggest talking to a couple of customers to understand why is this a business, why is this a business that has interesting prospects. Why is a customer really buying from you? So basically, talking to customers, definitely one. Second, talking to employees and ex-employees actually gives you a sense of perspective of what's happening on the business per se there. And third, I think having a viewpoint on the assessment on the sponsor or the promoter or the entrepreneur in terms of his openness and his ability to actually look at it more from a holistic business than easily compartmentalized in some shape and form. So I think talking to customers, talking to employees, ex-employees, talking to the entrepreneur to form a qualitative judgment, I think are essentially things that can actually help you understand the business a lot more there. However, having said that, I think clearly having proper financial documents or essentially records is actually critical, because you'll realize that that is not an excuse because if one has to really scale up and grow, that is more a hygiene factor than anything else. So if there is a genuine reason that financial documents are not in place, that is one thing. But clearly, I think I don't think that can be an excuse.
So I have a question from Nirmal. So he's asked, as an investor, what are the top 3 things that you look for? And in relation, I also have another question where someone has asked, what should early stage startups look for in investors?
I think that's a great question. The second question is something that I really like, which is right. And I think a lot of people think that money is money, and the color of money is exactly the same. Clearly, it is not so. I think an investor is more like a partner than just a provider of capital. So let me address the second question first, rather than basically here taking on. So very clearly, I think when you are choosing a person to come on board as an investor in your business, right? I think just think about it, that for the next 3-4 years or 5 years, would you be happy sitting having coffee with him, right? Does that thought basically give you shudders, or is that something that you would like to do? Is this a person that you would be happy to share informations, get his views and thought inputs? Is it basically something that you would really enjoy doing, right? So is this person a good friend that you can really have? I think look at it from that perspective, because what happens is you're not only taking capital from that person, but you're also giving away certain rights that are there. And I think those rights can later on become a bit of a challenge if you have basically brought the wrong partner on board. So very clearly, I think do you enjoy the company of the person? Does the person really add value to your business? Does he understand your business, and can he actually give you inputs? Third, I think, is he going to be a backseat driver, right? You want somebody who can basically give you advice, but you don't want somebody looking at your shoulder every day and basically telling you that, you should do this, you should do that, and micromanaging. I think if you can get somebody who has a combination of these 3 things, I think that would be really great, which is there. I missed out. What are the first question? Can you just remind me again, the top 3?
The top 3 things that as an investor you would look for.
I think absolutely. I think the key perspective as an investor that I would look for is basically the reverse of what I said that the entrepreneur should look for, right? Which is basically the only thing common, the only thing static in any investment is basically the entrepreneur. With pivots being normal, market condition changing, everything can change, but the one thing that is not going to change is the entrepreneur. So I think if you and when I look at the entrepreneur, I think you should look at things from a hygiene perspective, right? I mean, is it a person that you can trust, which is in? Do you trust his judgment? Do you trust his knowledge and understanding of the business? Do you trust his ability to reach out to others for a problem in case if he is not able to solve it? Or is he a know-it-all kind of a person and who believes it's only my way or highway, right? So I think one very clearly comfort on the entrepreneur and the sponsor, I think is the most critical element, because during the life of your investment, that is the one thing that's not going to change. The entrepreneur is going to remain exactly the same. I think the second thing that one should really look at is the entire market. Is the market actually big enough? Is there a way to go to market that allows you an entry and actually get there? And is this a market, and having an assessment on market and competitive position? I think that would be the second perspective that I would really think through. That one, is that really the factor to really take on there? And third, essentially being the financials. So I would look at it as entrepreneur, market and competition, and financials.
So I have one last question here. So Senthil Kumar has asked, for a good business, what are the elements and what should be its value? So he's listed out a few here.
Right.
He's given product cost and marketing, followed by good product and investment, and finally service. So is this ordering correct, or are there more elements to it?
So I think I think it's a good, it's an interesting way to look at ingredients of a business there, right? I think it's difficult to put percentages in play there, right? And I think, and I'm not sure everything really gets covered there. I think I like the part about the product cost of 25%, because I think having a gross margin is good. I like the part about the marketing, which is 25%, which is basically in, because that is what it really takes to actually, one, get the business in play there. So I think those are elements that I think are right, that the fact that a gross margin is basically a relatively high gross margin, which is there, which is enough to cover your cost of marketing dollars that is there, and which is sufficient to take to market there. I didn't understand the product there of good product 20% and product cost 25%. I think there's some overlap that comes into that. But I think the overall message that you're trying to put, I think, is relatively right, that 25% product cost gives you 75% gross margin. It allows you to budget for a marketing expense, which is relatively decent there. I think that is a good way to sort of think through. So just to give you an example, when you buy garments, for example, right? And I don't know if any of you have bought garments from a brand called Manyavar, which is this sherwanis that is there, right? Which is in. And this is true about most garmenting businesses. You'll find that the gross margins are anywhere from 70 to 80% there. Right? Because that is what allows them the ability to basically meet the entire increased cost of selling there. So I hope that addresses the question. Yeah.
So one last question from Hari Krishnan. So during the first stages, is it advisable to go for angel investors?
Absolutely. I would think it's advisable to go for angel investors, because I think angel investors bring in not only money, right? I think they bring in a whole host of network connects and an ability to actually be a good sounding board, right? More often than not, you realize that all of us, despite however good we want to be, we all have our own biases there. So we basically have a very fixated way of looking at things that are there, right? So if I've been brought up in a certain environment during my childhood, which is in right, or I've gone to a certain school, my perception of a school or my perception of family or a house is very different, right? I think very difficult to sort of if you have been brought up in a CBSE school, it's very difficult to over analyze and understand what an IB school childhood is like, which is there. I think it's good to sort of bring in, I think if you get an angel investor in, you essentially get a sounding board who has skin in the game. And I think that's the best proposition that you can really get. So I would actually really encourage to get angel investors in. But having said that, I think these should be investors. I think you should avoid people who love backseat driving and people who basically energize you rather than who basically de-energize you there. I think that's what you need to really look for in angel investors. Yeah.
So we've got another question from Mukesh. I think we can wind up with this. So what do you think would be the next big thing in India, or what sectors do you think they would be from?
Absolutely. I think I think we should be lucky to be born in India and be present in India at this point in time, right? I mean, it's a period of great change that is in place, right? This entire work from home or the pandemic that what has done is basically taught the world a few things, right? That things can pretty much be done remotely. And I think given the fact that India has got a huge skill set in basically IT, digitization, technology, which is in, right? I think this gives us a huge paramount capability to actually address the market needs there. So I would think that the opportunities would exist across the board, pretty much in terms of digitization of any product or service that would be there. I think what we really need to do is to basically have and develop, and the challenges that we would have would be to develop an understanding of the marketplace there, right? I think that is something that we really need to figure out how to develop skill sets to understand what the customers require and what they need to be. So I think if we can actually solve that problem of basically being close to the customer, of basically being aware of the nuances that are required, I think we do have the tools to actually make it really happen. And I think with that, we will find the opportunities across the board, because almost every business today is actually becoming a technology business there. So the entire space of data analytics that is in place, right? You'll find that the amount of data that is coming out is so large that just sort of refining information out of data and actionable information out of data actually is going to be a huge opportunity. I'm very optimistic about the opportunities that we really have, and I think it's a great time to be present in the country.
Sir, I just wanted to have a quick question with respect to a point you had mentioned, that the angel investor whom we pick should be a backseat driver or should not be a backseat driver?
Should not be a backseat driver.
Okay, but should not be someone who breathes down your neck either, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Which is then. So I mean, you look at in every car, you can have only one driver. If you've got two drivers in a car, you can be very sure that there'll be an accident, right? Okay. So every business needs to have one driver, which is in. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there can be multiple advisors. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there needs to be clarity on one single leader, which is why when you start to look at it, all businesses across the board need to have. And the reason to do that is not because of the fact that collective wisdom is basically better, is worse than individual wisdom. But the fact is that collective wisdom actually takes time. And in business, what happens is very often you don't have that luxury of time. You can analyze a perfect decision and you can analyze and make an effective decision. So making decision in the face of uncertain information is what business is all about. So it's a combination of information, a combination of gut feel, all of that on board. So you can't have two people, multiple people doing that.
Sir, I had a connected question.
Yes.
So I was wondering, when does it happen that the investors have thrown the founders out of the company, and how does this situation comes into picture?
Absolutely. So, like I said, right, when you look at it, and I thought there's one slide that I had put together, which was basically on the fact that the role of a founder or role of an entrepreneur changes over a period of time, right? At the start, you basically are doing everything. And then you start moving in, and the requirements of the business change from basically being nuts and bolts to a lot more strategic. So as a business grows, and when you would have thought or heard about things where the founder has been changed, right? So for example, say a Flipkart, you had a founder who was changed, right? Or for example, in Zivame, where the founder was changed and somebody else was brought in, which is in. So you find that in situations like these where investors have brought in somebody else to do a job, you find that the entrepreneur has not been able to change or evolve over time, which has been there. And it's not that it's good or bad. I mean, it is not a reflection on the entrepreneur, because as individual human beings, we all have our likes and dislikes. We want to be technical, we want to be focused, or we want to be generalists. So there are different perspectives and facets to a person's liking, which is there. So, but the demands of the business have changed, and the person hasn't changed or not willing to change. And that is what prompts that change of entrepreneur. I don't think the change of an entrepreneur is a reflection either of the investor or the entrepreneur himself, but it is just a question of a mismatch of needs of the business.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dinesh. So I think on this note, we can wind up. Thank you for a very interesting and insightful session. And thank you for addressing this topic, which is very relevant and important, especially for early stage startups and entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. Please continue.
So, yeah, I'd also like to thank everyone for joining us here today, and we hope to see you in our upcoming webinars. If you have any questions that you've not already asked, please do feel free to reach out to me. And if you would like to be notified about our upcoming webinars, please visit the link that I've posted in the chat box. So thank you all again. Thank you, Mr. Dinesh.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be a part of the panel, to address and speak with you. Thank you very much for the lovely questions and patient hearing. I really enjoyed making this presentation to you and sharing my thoughts. Best wishes, and I think, as I said, I think this is a great time and an opportunity to sort of do things at this point in time. Thank you.
Dinesh.
Thank you, Professor Tile, for inviting me. Thank you very much.